Sir, I'm going to need you to leave. We don't serve people like you here. The sentence wasn't shouted. It was delivered calmly, too calmly, but it cut sharper than any scream. The lobby of Unity Bank's East 9th Street branch froze. The marble floors, the faint sound of printers, the clicking heels of customers walking by, all fell into silence. Because a middle-aged black man, dressed in a plain gray hoodie, faded jeans, and old sneakers, had just been told that he didn't belong. He wasn't shouting. He wasn't making a scene. He was holding out an ID and a bank card, politely asking for a wire transfer. But what he got was humiliation. And what the staff didn't know, what they couldn't even imagine, was that in exactly 7 minutes, the man they were trying to shove out of the door would hold the fate of their careers in the palm of his hand, not with revenge, not with rage, but with one sentence, just one line, that flipped the entire institution upside down. This isn't just a story about race. It's a story about power, about presence, about what happens when arrogance meets truth. And the truth decides to speak, because today, in this lobby, they tried to silence a man they thought was nobody, but they forgot. Sometimes power doesn't wear a suit. It walks in quietly. It listens. And when the moment comes, it speaks. His name was Julian Carter. 46 years old, black, calm, quiet, and worth over $14 billion. He didn't look like it. That morning, he stepped into the Unity Bank branch on East 9th Street in downtown Cleveland with no briefcase, no personal assistant, no driver waiting outside, just a man with steady hands and a bank card, the same kind issued to every customer. He wore an old gray hoodie, soft from years of wear, jeans with a faint tear at the knee, and sneakers that hadn't been new since his daughter was in middle school. To most people in that lobby, he looked ordinary, unremarkable, forgettable. And that's exactly what he wanted. Because Julian wasn't just a man making a withdrawal, he was the CEO of Unity Financial Group, the parent company that owned every single Unity Bank branch in the country, including this one. But he hadn't come today as their boss. He had come as a test. For the past 6 weeks, Julian's office had been receiving anonymous complaints, emails, voicemails, screenshots, Reddit posts, all describing patterns of subtle, systemic racism at this very branch. Minority customers being interrogated, IDs double-checked without cause, service delayed or denied. Dress code judgments, someone called it. Julian didn't believe in launching cold investigations from behind a desk. He believed in showing up, in seeing things for himself. Because 20 years ago, he'd been in this exact same city, standing at a different counter in a different bank, and he remembered what it felt like to be treated like a threat for simply asking for access to your own money. That moment had never left him. In fact, it had fueled him. It was the fire behind every board meeting, the reason he built Unity Financial in the first place, a bank where no one, no matter how they dressed, looked, or sounded, would ever be made to feel less than human. But this morning, Julian wasn't met with respect. He wasn't even met with suspicion. He was met with something colder, something uglier, contempt wrapped in protocol. And standing across from him, arms folded and chin raised, was Deborah Langston, the branch manager with 22 years of experience, and not an ounce of humility. Beside her, Kyle Manning, The teller who didn't even glance at the name on the ID before saying, "We've had scammers dressed like that before." And just behind them, frozen mid-transaction, was Tiana Brooks, a junior employee, barely 26, whose eyes said what her lips couldn't yet. Something is wrong here. Julian noticed. Not just the words, but the energy. The way heads turned, the way smiles faded, the way that bank, his bank, tightened like a noose around anyone who didn't look the part. And Julian Carter, billionaire or not, was about to find out just how far they'd go. To keep someone like him out, Julian slid his bank card and ID across the glass counter. "I'd like to make a wire transfer, $1 million. From my Unity account." His voice was steady, controlled, but the silence that followed wasn't. Deborah didn't move. She didn't even look at the card. Instead, she tilted her head, eyes narrowing just slightly, and said, "$1 million? In that outfit?" The words weren't curious. They weren't cautious. They were cutting. Kyle, the teller, chuckled under his breath, loud enough to be heard. "We'll need to re-verify your identity, sir. We've had scammers try this exact move before." Julian didn't blink. "My ID is valid, so is my account." "Right," Kyle said, waving off the card like it was a flyer. "But we'll need proof of funds. You know how it is. Protocol." From the back of the lobby, a man let out a quiet, "Huh?" A woman near the ATM turned her head. People were starting to notice. That didn't stop Sarah, the second teller, from stepping in. She reached for Julian's card, and without even checking it, slid it into her drawer. With a loud click, she locked it shut. "This card looks suspicious," she said flatly. "Honestly, you probably stole it." There it was. The sentence that cut the air in half. Gasps rippled through the lobby. An older woman clutched her purse. A teenager looked up from his phone. Rachel Owens, a regular customer and freelance journalist, pulled her phone from her coat pocket and tapped record. "This," she said under her breath, "is racism at Unity Bank, and it's going online." Julian still didn't move, but behind his eyes, something had shifted. Not anger, not yet, but a flicker of cold recognition. He'd seen this before. 20 years ago. 10. Last year. Same story. Different bank. Tiana stood frozen behind her desk, lips parted, heart pounding. She'd been trained to follow policy. She knew the customer hadn't raised his voice. She knew the account looked real. And she knew, deep down, what was happening in front of her wasn't just procedural. "He has every right to be here," she said softly. Deborah turned to her like she'd just spoken out of turn in church. "You're not paid to argue, Tiana." But the young woman stood her ground. "I'm paid to follow protocol, and right now, you're the one breaking it." The tension snapped tighter. Kyle leaned into the intercom. "Final warning, sir. Leave the premises or we'll escalate." Julian looked at him, not with fear, not with fury, just disappointment. He turned to Deborah, then to Sarah, then to the drawer. "You're not just mishandling a customer," he said quietly. "You're ruining unity." His voice wasn't loud, but it echoed, not because of volume, but because of truth. "This isn't about me," he added. "It's about you, and the choices you're making in front of witnesses." And that's when it happened. A customer near the back stepped forward. "Did I just hear her accuse him of stealing without even checking the card?" Another voice joined in. "This is ridiculous." That man didn't raise his voice once. But y'all acting like he pulled a weapon. The room was shifting. The air wasn't silent anymore. It was charged with tension, with outrage, with something that couldn't be locked in a drawer. And yet, Deborah pushed further. She pressed the silent alarm under the counter, then hissed to Kyle, "If he doesn't leave in 2 minutes, call the police." Kyle nodded. Sarah smirked. And Tiana stepped forward again. "If you push this any further," she said, "you're going to make the biggest mistake of your career." Deborah didn't flinch. "He's a fraud." But Julian only exhaled, slow, controlled, then said the sentence that would break the dam. "You have no idea who I am." Julian didn't raise his voice. He didn't demand anything. He just reached into his jacket pocket and slowly pulled out a phone. No one paid attention at first, but the way he held it, low, steady, controlled, made Tiana's breath catch in her throat. He tapped the screen once, then held the phone up to his ear. "Lena," he said calmly. The voice on the other end answered instantly. "Yes, sir." "Activate internal protocol, full surveillance. I want eyes and audio live inside branch 1147 East 9th Street, Cleveland." "Copy that," Lena replied without hesitation. "System is now live. We're logging everything from this moment forward." Julian didn't look at anyone as he spoke, but the atmosphere shifted. Something about the tone, something about the certainty. It wasn't a bluff, it wasn't fear, it was a signal. A quiet declaration of war, without shouting, without threat. Sarah scoffed loudly. "Calling your little sister won't save you, sir." But Tiana heard the name. Lena. Everyone in the Unity system knew who she was. Lena Banks, Executive Director of Internal Compliance. Julian wasn't calling his sister. He was calling corporate teeth. "Sir, if you don't leave now," Kyle cut in, "we'll have to involve security." "Go ahead," Julian replied without turning. "Just be sure you spell my name right in the report." That's when Rachel, still filming, raised her voice for the first time. "Actually, I'd like to know his name too, so I can tag it properly." "Don't film this," Deborah barked. "It's a private institution." "No, ma'am," Rachel shot back. "It's a public act of discrimination, and it's going online in 4K. Customers were shifting now. 2 women by the deposit slips moved closer, whispering. An older gentleman stepped away from the line and stood with his arms folded. "I've banked here for over a decade," he said. "And I've never seen a man be treated this way for wearing jeans." Sarah rolled her eyes. "This is exactly the kind of behavior we report. Aggressive, non-compliant." Julian looked up. His voice didn't rise, but it landed like stone. "Asking questions isn't aggression. Being calm under attack isn't defiance. And existing while black isn't a threat." There was a pause, a full beat of silence. Then Tiana did something that changed everything. She stepped forward, past Sarah, past Kyle, and unlocked the drawer that held Julian's card. "Enough," she said. "This is not how we operate, not here, not anymore." Deborah snapped. "You are out of line." "No," Tiana said, eyes shining but steady. "You are." And this isn't the first time. Everyone stopped. Julian turned his head slightly. "You've seen this before?" Tiana nodded, once, then looked around the room and spoke louder. "Last month, a Latina customer was made to wait 45 minutes to cash a check. Deborah said she looked sketchy. A few weeks before that, a Nigerian engineer was denied a loan without anyone opening his file. And last year," she looked Deborah directly in the eyes, "last year, You had a man escorted out because he asked to speak to a supervisor about a mortgage. You said he was hostile. He was a veteran. Gasps. Rachel turned the camera on Deborah, who had gone pale. This your standard of service? Rachel asked. No comment, Deborah muttered. That's funny, Julian said softly, because this whole branch has been full of comments since I walked in. Then, from the back of the room, a soft voice spoke. It was the elderly man who had stepped out of line earlier. If this man's being targeted, and we all see it, then staying silent makes us part of the problem. He turned to Julian. Son, I don't know who you are, but I'm standing with you. Another customer stepped forward, then another. A quiet line began to form, not at the teller desk, but around Julian. A protective circle. No one said it out loud, but the message was clear. You're not alone anymore. And that was when Julian, for the first time that morning, let a faint smile touch the corner of his mouth. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. Because now, the room was listening. The air inside Unity Bank's East 9th Street branch had changed. It wasn't just tense now. It was electric, like a storm about to break open. Deborah stood stiff, arms crossed, trying to mask panic with authority. Kyle shifted behind the counter, face blank, but his foot tapped the floor like a metronome gone rogue. Sarah? She clutched the drawer like it was a shield, lips pressed into a line, eyes darting toward the lobby cameras she suddenly remembered were there. Julian, however, stood still, unmoved, surrounded by strangers who now stood with him. Then, it happened. Rachel Owens, her phone still live streaming, turned the camera directly to Julian and asked, Sir, if you don't mind, what's your name? Julian looked at her. He didn't flinch. He didn't smile. He just turned and looked straight at Deborah. You want to know my name? He asked quietly. You already heard it. You just didn't listen. He nodded slightly toward Tiana. Tiana, her voice steady now, pulled up the internal banking screen on her terminal. She tapped a few keys, then slowly turned the monitor for everyone to see. The name displayed was bold, unmistakable, Julian Carter. Customer tier, executive account. Status, top-level authorization, linked entity, Unity Financial Group position, chief executive officer. There was a moment of silence that didn't feel real, like the room itself was holding its breath. Sarah's face drained of color. Kyle took one step back. Deborah's jaw slowly unhinged, lips parting without sound. And Rachel, still recording, gasped. Oh my God, she whispered. You're the CEO. Julian nodded. Once. No arrogance, no anger, just certainty. That's correct, he said. I'm Julian Carter, Chief Executive Officer of Unity Financial Group, owner of this building, signatory on every employment contract in this branch. And then came the moment the room broke. Customers gasped. Phones went up. A woman near the entrance dropped her wallet from sheer disbelief. You tried to eject your own CEO? Someone shouted. You racially profiled the man who writes your paycheck? Said another. Deborah stumbled backward, reaching for the desk behind her. This isn't real. It's some kind of trick, she stammered. Tiana didn't hesitate. It's real. I just ran the authentication twice. Julian turned to Sarah. Return my card. Now. Her hand shook as she unlocked the drawer and slid the card across the counter. Julian picked it up, casually, deliberately, then looked at Kyle. You didn't even check the screen. You made a judgment the moment I stepped up. Kyle couldn't meet his gaze. Julian turned last to Deborah. And you? You set the tone. You escalated. You silenced your staff, you silenced customers, and then you lied to cover it. Deborah tried to find words, but the room wouldn't wait. Rachel pointed the camera at her. "What do you have to say now, Deborah?" He didn't identify himself," she shouted, trying to reclaim control. Julian tilted his head. "I didn't have to. Because real leadership isn't about demanding recognition. It's about watching how people treat others when they think no one important is watching." He stepped forward, not threateningly, but with the weight of justice in every step. "You had every opportunity to do the right thing, but instead, you chose arrogance. You chose fear. You chose to weaponize policy against a person who walked in with nothing but a card and calm." He paused, looked around the room, then added, "And now, I'm choosing to clean house." The silence that followed wasn't just shock. It was the sound of power shifting. The branch wasn't Deborah's anymore. It never really was. Now, everyone knew it. Julian turned toward the phone in his hand. "Lena," he said, "you can proceed." And from the speaker, Lena's voice rang out. "Confirmed. Terminations for Deborah Langston, Kyle Manning, and Sarah Brooks are now processing. Internal systems revoked. Access locked. HR has been notified." Deborah screamed, "You can't do this! There's a process! There's protocol!" Julian looked at her, calm, unwavering. "Exactly. And you broke every part of it." The story spread faster than any transaction ever processed at Unity Bank. Just hours after Rachel Owens's live stream hit the internet, the incident at the East 9th Street branch had become more than a viral video. It became a national reckoning. The first headline on Twitter read, "Black CEO denied service at his own bank, then fired the entire staff on the spot." Within hours, it was on CNN, then NBC, then The Washington Post. Forbes called it a masterclass in quiet leadership and corporate reckoning. People weren't just outraged at the discrimination. They were stunned by the power shift. A black man walking in as a customer and walking out as a system correcting itself in real time. But Julian didn't speak to the press. He didn't go on morning shows. He didn't launch a PR campaign. He chose silence and action. Within 72 hours, a memo was sent to all 200 Unity Bank branches nationwide. "We're not reforming to save face. We're reforming because it's the right thing to do." Julian launched a sweeping new initiative called Unity Rebuilt, an 18-month transformation to retrain staff, reinvestigate buried complaints, and create a new system called the Trust Index. Every branch would no longer be measured just by revenue or efficiency, but by how they treat every human being who walks through their doors. Tiana Brooks, the young employee who stood for truth, was promoted to Regional Ethics Supervisor for Ohio. Rachel Owens, the freelance journalist, became the voice behind a nationwide series of investigative stories exposing microaggressions in financial institutions. And behind the scenes, Julian watched. He didn't look for applause. He looked for patterns. Because for every story caught on camera, there were thousands that weren't. And he made a promise. No story would go unseen again. 3 weeks later, Unity Bank launched a new program, community listening sessions, not behind bulletproof glass, not under fluorescent lights, but in community halls with folding chairs and eye-level conversations. There were no titles, no hierarchies, just human beings telling human stories. At the first session in Cleveland, Julian stood up, looked around the room, and said, "I didn't take action because I was denied service. I took action because millions of people are denied respect every single day. And if even a CEO can be dismissed so easily, imagine what happens to those with no title, no wealth, no voice. Silence followed, but it wasn't awkward. It was honest. The kind of silence that makes you think. The lobby was quiet now. The headlines had faded. The tweets slowed down. The cameras packed away. But Julian Carter stood exactly where it all began. Not on a podium, not behind a desk, just in the center of the same marble floor where he had once been told, "We don't serve people like you here." And now, he had one last thing to say. He looked into the eyes of his employees, some still stunned, some ashamed, some changed. He looked at the new customers who came not to withdraw money, but to deposit trust. And he said, "This was never about me. This was about what we tolerate when no one is watching, about what we justify, because it's easier than confronting who we've become." He paused, then added, more softly, "No one should have to wear a suit to be respected. No one should have to explain their worth to be treated with basic dignity." Then he turned directly to the camera, the one Rachel held in the back of the room. "And to you watching this at home, I want to ask you something. Have you ever been made to feel like you didn't belong? Have you ever walked into a room, a store, a school, and felt every eye decide you didn't deserve to be there? And when it happened, did you say something? Did you stay quiet? Did you convince yourself it wasn't your place?" He nodded slowly. "I've been there. More times than I can count. But this time, I had power. I had position. I had proof. Most people don't. They get labeled, ignored, pushed aside. They don't go viral. They just go home, carrying the weight of invisibility." He took a breath. Not a dramatic one, just enough to let it land. "So, the next time you see someone being diminished, even if it's subtle, even if it's legal, even if it's dressed up as company policy, remember this moment, because silence may not make you the villain, but it always makes you a witness." Then he walked slowly toward the exit, the same glass doors he had once been shoved toward. Only now, the space parted for him, not because of fear, but because of respect. Before he left, he turned one last time. His voice, now quiet but unshakable. "We can't build better systems unless we build better humans to run them. And better humans are the ones who speak when it's inconvenient, stand when it's unpopular, and believe that no one, no matter how they look, should ever have to prove they deserve to belong." Have you ever been judged or mistreated because of how you looked, dressed, or where you came from, only to later prove everyone wrong? If you had the chance to say one sentence in that moment, what would it be? Share your story below.